Hello, my name is Albionus. I'm a reading streamer, and today we are reading The Account of Plato by Diogenes. This is a part of Diogenes Laertius' book, The Lives of the Eminent Philosophers. It is a series of biographies written by Diogenes Laertius, who was a Greek living under Roman rule during the 3rd century. And so, while being an old book, it lacks modern archaeological information. It is an ancient account, and is interesting to see how the ancients knew these people. And this character in particular, Plato, is someone of very great interest. And so in this short part of this book, we will see how the Romans and how the Greeks of this time perhaps would have seen Plato, what they knew about him. Sometime after this, or perhaps leading up to this, the Neoplatonists and the Christians and all that sort of stuff really takes full grip, and the notion of Plato and Platonism become blurred. But here should be perhaps a more pure account of what Plato is. At least his life. Diogenes Laertius is more of a biographer than a philosopher. He does not speak too much about the specifics of their philosophy. He is much more focused on the lives of those physical people. But without further ado, let's get into the book. Plato, son of Ariston and Perictione, or Platone, was an Athenian, his mother tracing her descent back to Solon, for Solon's brother was Drapides, and Drapides was the father of Critias, who was the father of Callisarchus, who was the father of Critias, one of the 30 tyrants, and of Glaucon, who was the father of Charmides and Perictione, of whom Ariston fathered Plato. Thus, Plato was in the 6th generation from Solon. Solon himself traces descent from Neleus and Poseidon, and his father is said to have traced his descent to Codrus, son of Melanthus. Both, according to Phrasylus, trace their descent to Poseidon. Speusippus, in Plato's funeral feast, and Clearchus in his encomium on Plato, and Anaximenes in his second book on philosophy, say that there was a story in Athens that Ariston tried to force himself on Perictione, who was then in the bloom of youth, and was rebuffed. And then, when he ceased resorting to force, he saw a vision of the god Apollo, after which he abstained from conjugal relations until Perictione gave birth. Plato was born, as Apollodorus says in his chronicles, in the 88th Olympiad, on the 7th day of the month of Phargalion, on the day that Apollo was born, according to the Delians. He died at a wedding feast, according to Hermippus, in the first year of the 108th Olympiad, at the age of 89. The Anthes, however, says that Plato died at the age of 84. He was therefore 6 years younger than Isocrates. For the latter was born during the archonship of Lysimachus, the former during that of Arminius, the year that Pericles died. He was of the deme of Calitus, as Antileon says in the second book on his chronology. He was born, according to some, in Aegina, in the house of Phidiades, son of Thales. As Favornius says in his miscellaneous history, for Plato's father had been sent there with others as a settler, but returned to Athens when the Athenians were expelled by the Spartans, who came to raid the Aeginetans. As Apollodorus says in his 8th book of his Discourses, Plato was also a choreagos at Athens. Dion, defraying his expenses. Plato had 2 brothers, Adeimantus and Glaucon, and a sister, Latone, who was the mother of Speusippus. he was taught letters at the school of Dionysius, whom he mentions in Rivals in Love. He studied gymnastics with Ariston, the Argive wrestler, for whom he receives the name Plato because of his robust constitution. The name Plato is derived from the Greek word platos, meaning broad. He was originally named Aristocles, after his grandfather, as Alexander says in his Successions. But some say he was given this name because of the breadth of his style, or because his face was broad, as Neanthes claims. There are also some who say that he wrestled at the Isthmian Games, as Dicaearchus states in his first book on his work On Lives, and that he applied himself to painting and writing poems, first diphrams and then lyric poetry and tragedies. He is said to have been weak-voiced, as Timotheus the Athenian says in his work On Lives. Socrates is said to have dreamed that he had a newborn swan. Let me read that again. Socrates is said to have dreamt that he had a newborn swan in his lap, and that the bird suddenly sprouted feathers and flew up with a sweet cry. And the next day, Plato was introduced to him, and Socrates realized that the young man was the bird of the dream. Plato studied philosophy, at first in the academy, and then in the garden at Colonus, as Alexander says in his Successions, where he read the works of Heraclitus. Later, when he was about to compete for a prize in tragedy, he listened to Socrates in front of the theatre of Dionysus, after which he burned his poems, saying, "Come hither, Hephaestus, Plato needs you now." From then on, they say, having reached the age of 20, he became a disciple of Socrates. After Socrates died, he attached himself to Cratylus, the Heraclitean, and Hermogenes, who professed the philosophy of Parmenides. Then, at the age of 28, according to Hermodorus, he withdrew to Megara to be with Euclides, along with a number of Socrates' disciples. Later, he went to Cyrene to visit Theodorus, the mathematician, and from there he departed for Italy to meet the Pythagoreans, Philolaus and Aretaeus. Then he travelled to Egypt to see the priests. It is said that Euripides accompanied him. Falling ill there, he was cured by the priests, who treated him with seawater. This may have inspired the line, "The sea washes away all human ills." He also declared that, according to Homer, the Egyptians surpass all mankind as healers. Plato was then planning to meet with the Magi, but departed because of the wars in Asia. On his return to Athens, he resided at the Academy, a gymnasium on the outskirts of the city, in a woodland named after the hero, one Hecademus. As is stated by Eupolis in his Shirkers, "In the shady walks of divine Hecademus." And Timon says of Plato, "Broadest, he led all, sweet-voiced speaker, musical as the cicadas, who, perching on a tree of Hecademus, send forth their gentle voices." Originally, because of the syllable he in the hero's name, the place was called Hecademia. The philosopher was a friend of Isocrates, and Praxiphanes describes a conversation of theirs about poets that was held at the country estate where Isocrates was Plato's guest. Aristoxenus says that Plato served in 3 military campaigns, the first time at Tanagra, the second at Corinth, and the third at Delium, where he also won the prize of valour. He created a synthesis of the doctrines of Heraclitus, Pythagoras, and Socrates. About perceptible things he agreed with Heraclitus. About objects of thought with Pythagoras, and about political philosophy with Socrates. Some, including Satyrus, say that Plato wrote to Dion in Sicily, instructing him to purchase from Philolaus 3 books about the doctrines of Pythagoras for 100 minas. For they say he was well provided for, having received more than 80 talents from Dionysius. As Onetor says in his essay, where he addresses the question whether the wise man will make money, he also derived considerable assistance from Epicharmus, the comic poet, having edited a great many of his writings, as Alcimus says in his work Tu Amintas, which consists of 4 books. In the first of these, he writes as following: Plato appears to draw heavily on the words of Epicharmus. Just consider, Plato says that the object of sense is that which never remains fixed in quality or quantity, but is always changing and in flux. The assumption being that the things from which one may take away number are no longer equal or determinate, nor do they have quantity or quality. These are objects that are always engaged in becoming, but never in being. The object of thought, on the other hand, is something from which nothing is subtracted, and to which nothing is added. This is the nature of eternal things, the character of which is to be always alike and the same. And indeed, Epicharmus has expressed himself clearly about objects of sense and objects of thought. Now we have a quote here of some dialogue, and the characters are not listed, they are only listed as A and B, I believe. A. But the gods always existed, and were never lacking, while things in our world are always the same, and arise from the same cause. B. But it is said that chaos was the first of the gods. A. How so? If there was nothing out of which, or into, which it could come first. B. Then did nothing come first? A. No, by Zeus, nor second either, of the things that we are now talking about. If someone adds 1 to an odd or even number of pebbles, whichever you like, or takes 1 away from an existing quantity, do you think we have the same number? B. By no means. A. Or, if one wants to add a cubit to another length, or cut one from an existing length, would the original length remain? B. Of course not. A. So now consider mankind in this same way. For one man grows, the other wastes away, but all are changing all the time. Well, a thing that is naturally changing and never remaining the same would always be different from the thing that has undergone the change. And even you and I were different yesterday, and we're different even today, and will be different tomorrow, and will never remain ourselves, according to this argument. That's the end of the dialogue. Alcimus goes on to say, the wise maintain that the soul senses some things through the body. For example, when it hears and sees, but senses other things by itself, without the body. This is why, among existing things, some are objects of sense, and some of thought. Hence, Plato says that those who wish to understand the principles of the universe must first distinguish the ideas by themselves. For example, similarity, unity, quantity, magnitude, rest, and motion. Second, one must assume the existence, in and of itself, of beauty, goodness, justice, and other such things. And third, one must understand how many of the ideas relate to one another, as do knowledge or magnitude or ownership, bearing in mind that the things we experience have the same names as these ideas, because they partake of them, by which I mean that all that partakes of justice is just, and all that partakes of beauty is beautiful. Each of these ideas is eternal. It is a concept that does not admit of change. Hence, he says that in nature, the ideas stand like archetypes, and that all other things resemble these archetypes because they are copies of them. And here are the words of Epicharmus about the good and about the ideas. Side note, when he uses the word ideas, he is referring to forms, the theory of forms. A. Is flute playing a thing? B. By all means. A. Is man, then, flute playing? B. Certainly not. A. Let me see, then. What is a flute player? What do you think he is? A man or not? B. A man, of course. A. Then don't you think the same would be the case with the good? The good is in itself a thing, and the man who has learned that thing knows it to become good. For just as one becomes a flute player when he has learned flute playing, or a dancer when he has learned dancing, or a plater when he has learned plating. And likewise, in all such instances, whichever you like, the man himself would not be the craft, but the craftsman. End dialogue. Plato, in developing his theory of ideas, says, if in fact there is memory, then the ideas must be present in things, because memory is of something stable and permanent. But nothing is permanent except the ideas. For how, he asks, would animals have survived unless they grasped ideas and had been endowed by nature with intelligence to do so? As it is, they remember similarities and what their food is like, which proves that the ability to register similarity is innate in all animals. Hence, they also recognize their own kind. Well, how does Epicharmus put it? Wisdom, Eumaeus, does not belong to one kind only, but all living creatures alike have understanding. For if you will diligently study the female among poultry, she does not bear her young alive, but broods upon her eggs, and breathes life into them. As for her wisdom, nature alone comprehends it, for the hen has learned it from her. And again, it is not surprising that we speak this way, and are pleased with ourselves, and think ourselves so fine, for a dog appears the finest thing to a dog, an ox to an ox, an ass to an ass, and a pig to a pig. Noting these, and other such instances throughout his 4 books, Alchemist draws attention to the assistance Plato derived from Epicharmus. That Epicharmus himself was not unaware of his own wisdom, one can learn from the verses in which he envisions his emulator. And as I think, for that which I think I know full well, the memory of my words will survive, someone, taking and divesting them of the metre they now possess, will clothe them in a purple robe embroidered with fine phrases. A man hard to wrestle with, he will make everyone else seem easy to pin. Plato, it seems, was the first to bring Athens the works of Sophron, the writer of mimes, which had been neglected, and to imitate his manner of drawing characters. His works were even found under Plato's pillow. He sailed 3 times to Sicily, the first to see the island and the craters of the volcano. It was then that Dionysius, son of Hermocrates, the reigning tyrant, forced Plato to associate with him. When Plato was conversing about tyranny and declared that the advantage of the ruler is not of value for its own sake unless he is preeminently virtuous, he offended his host. In his anger, Dionysius said, "You talk like an old fart," to which Plato replied, "And you like a tyrant." Vexed at this, the tyrant was at first eager to have Plato put to death. Then, dissuaded by Dion and Aristomenes, He did not go that far, but entrusted Plato to Polus, the Spartan, who had just arrived on an embassy, with orders to sell him into slavery. And Polus took him to Aegina, where he put him up for sale. Then Carmandrus, son of Carmandrides, indicted him on a capital charge, in accordance with the law that had been enacted among the Aeginetans, to the effect that any Athenian who set foot on the island should be put to death without trial. It was Carmandrus himself who had passed the law, as Favorinus says in his miscellaneous history. But when someone declared, in jest, that the transgressor was a philosopher, they acquitted him. Some say that when Plato was brought into court and found himself under close scrutiny, he spoke not a word, but calmly awaited the outcome. The assembly decided not to put him to death, but to sell him, as though he were a prisoner of war. Aniceris of Cyrene, who chanced to be present, ransomed Plato for 20 minas, some say he paid 30, and sent him to Athens to his friends, who promptly remitted the money. But Aniceris refused to accept it, saying that the Athenians were not the only men who deserved to look after Plato. Others say that Dion sent the money and that Aniceris did not keep it, but brought Plato a little garden in the academy. And it is reported that Polus was defeated by Cabrius, and thereafter drowned at Helice, having incurred the god's wrath on behalf of the philosopher, as Favorinus says in his first book on his Reminiscences. Dionysius himself could not rest easy. On learning what had happened, he wrote asking Plato not to speak ill of him, and Plato wrote back that he had no leisure to think about Dionysius. Drink some water. On his second visit, Plato asked the younger Dionysius for a territory, and men who would live in accordance with his plan for a republic. But though Dionysius gave his promise, he did not keep it. Some say that Plato found himself in danger for having encouraged Dion and Theodotus to try to liberate the island. It was then that Archytas, the Pythagorean, writing a letter to Dionysius, interceded for Plato and had him brought safely to Athens. Archytas' letter runs as follows. Archytas wishes Dionysius good health. We, all of us being friends of Plato, have sent Lamisus and Photidas to you, that we may receive the philosopher, in accordance with the agreement made by you. You will do well to recall the zeal with which you urged us all to secure his coming, resolved as you were to persuade him and to undertake, among other things, responsibility for his safety while he remained with you and on his return journey. Remember also that you made much of his coming, and, from then on, esteemed him more than anyone at court. But if animosity has arisen, it is incumbent upon you to behave humanely, and restore the man to us unharmed. You will thereby do what is just, and at the same time earn our gratitude. Welcome watchmakering. I think I've seen you in... Oh, who was it? There was another streamer I've seen you in. I think it was Uto. I think you're a regular there. Welcome to the stream. Plato sailed to Sicily, a third time, in hope of reconciling Dion and Dionysius. But on failing to gain his end, he returned to his own country. There he did not engage in public life, though it is clear from his writings that he was a statesman. The reason was that, by then, the people had become accustomed to policies at odds with his own. Pamphylia, in the 25th book of her Reminiscences, says that the Arcadians and Thebans, when they were founding Megalopolis, invited him to be their lawgiver, but when he learned that they were opposed to equality of possessions, he would not go. There is a story that he pleaded for Cabrias when the general was on trial for his life, though none of the other citizens was willing to do so. And as Plato was going up to the Acropolis with Cabrias, Crobilus, the informer, met him and said, "Have you come to plead for the defendant? Do you not know that the hemlock of Socrates awaits you?" To this, Plato replied, "Just as I ran the risks when defending my country, so I'll run them now in fulfilling my duty to a friend." It may have been Colonc as well, yes, you may be right there. He was the first to introduce arguments by question and answer, as Favorinus says in its 8th book on its miscellaneous history. The first to explain Laertius of Phasos, the analytic method of inquiry. He was also the first in philosophical discourse to use the terms antipodes, element, dialectic, quality, oblong, planar surface, and divine providence. He was the first philosopher to rebut the speech of Lysias, son of Cephalus, quoting it verbatim in his Phaedrus. He was the first to recognise the importance of scholarship, and he was the first to attack the views of almost all his predecessors. One wonders why he failed to mention Democritus. Neanthes of Cyzicus says that when Plato went to Olympia, the eyes of all the Greeks were turned towards him. It was then that he met Dion, who was about to launch a military campaign against Dionysius. In his first book of Favorinus' Reminiscences, it says that Mithridates the Persian dedicated a statue of Plato in the Academy, and had it inscribed with the words, "Mithridates the Persian, son of Orontobates, dedicated to the Muses, a likeness of Plato, fashioned by Silanion." Heraclides says that as a young man, Plato was so reserved and decorous that he was never seen laughing immoderately. Yet, too, he was ridiculed by the comic poets. At any rate, Theopompus says in his comedy, Sweet Tooth, "Nothing is truly one, even the number 2 is scarcely one," as Plato says. And Anaxandrides, in his comedy, Theseus, says, "Since he was munching olives, just like Plato." And even Timon makes a pun on Plato's name, as imagined by Plato, who makes astonishing discoveries. Alexis, in his Merops, "You've come in the nick of time, in my perplexity, walking up and down just like Plato. I found no wise plan, but only tired my legs." And in Ancylion, "You don't know what you're talking about. Run about with Plato, and you'll know all about soap and onions." Amphis in Amphicrates, "As for the good, whichever it may be, that you're likely to get on her account, I know even less about it, master, than I do about the good of Plato." And in Dexademades, "O Plato, all you know about is how to frown, lifting your haughty eyebrows like a snail." I'm not aware that snails have eyebrows. Cratinus in The False Changeling, "Are you a man? Clearly. And have you a soul? As Plato would say? I don't know for sure, but I suspect I have." Alexis in Olympiodorus, "My mortal body withered away, but my immortal part soared into the air." To which someone replies, "Isn't this a lecture of Plato's?" And in Parasite, "Or with Plato, to chatter on him alone." Anaxagoras also makes fun of him in his Batryon, and in Circe, and in Wealthy Women. Aristippus, in the 4th book on his work on the luxuriousness of the ancients, says that Plato fell in love with a young man named Astor, who joined him in the study of astronomy, and with the above-mentioned Dion, and as some say with Phaedrus too. His passion is evident, and in the following epigrams, which is said to have addressed to him, "You gaze at the stars, my Aster. Would that I were heaven, that I might gaze at you with many eyes." And another, "You shone once, Aster, morning star among the living, and now in death, evening star among the dead." And this to Dion, "Tears to Hecuba and the women of Troy. From their birth the fates allotted, but on you, Dion, who have set up a trophy of noble deeds, the gods showered prosperous hopes. You lie in your wide country, honoured by your countrymen. You drove my spirits mad with love, O Dion." This, it is said, was actually inscribed on Dion's tomb in Syracuse, and they say that when he fell in love with Alexis and Phaedrus, as I mentioned earlier, he wrote the following verses. "Now I have only to say of Alexis, he is beautiful, and everyone everywhere turns to gaze at him. Why, my hearts, do you show the dogs a bone and live to regret it? Wasn't this how we lost Phaedrus?" He also had a passion for Archanasa, of whom he wrote as follows. "I have a mistress, Archanasa of Colophon, whose very wrinkles inspire the keenest passion. O wretches, who met such beauty on its maiden voyage, what fire you braved!" And also to Agathon. "While kissing Agathon, my soul rushed to my lips, and as if, unhappy wretch, it would pass over to him." And another, "I throw you an apple, and if you consent to love me, accept it, and in exchange give me your virginity. But if you're otherwise inclined, then take this very apple, and see how fleeting is the bloom of youth." And another, "An apple am I, tossed by one who loves you. Only consent, Xanthippe, for you and I are ripening on the vine." They say that the epigram about the Eretrians, who were swept from their country, was written by him. "We are Eretrian by race, from Euboea, and live and lie dead near Susa. How far, alas, from our native land." And this, "Cypris to the Muses, maidens, honour Aphrodite, or I'll arm Eros against you. The Muses to Cyprus, save your chatter for Ares, the lad doesn't fly this way." And another, "A man found some gold and left a noose in its place. The owner, finding his treasure gone, donned the noose." Lots of quotes. Molon, being hostile to Plato, said, "What is surprising is not that Dionysius should be in Corinth, but that Plato should be in Sicily." And it seems that Xenophon was not on good terms with Plato. They have written similar works, at any rate, as if out of rivalry for each other. A symposium, an apology of Socrates, and memoirs that deal with ethical matters. And one of them wrote a Republic, the other an Education of Cyrus. In his Laws, Plato says that Xenophon's account of Cyrus's education is a fiction, for the real Cyrus did not resemble the man portrayed by Xenophon. They both make mention of Socrates, but nowhere do they refer to each other except for Xenophon's mention of Plato in the third book of his Memorabilia. It is said that when Antisthenes was about to read one of his own works in public, he invited Plato to attend, and when Plato asked what he was planning to read, Antisthenes said, "A work on the impossibility of contradiction," to which Plato replied, "But how can you write on this subject?" And because Plato had shown that the argument against contradiction was self-contradictory, Antisthenes wrote a dialogue against Plato entitled Saphon. From then on, they continued to be on bad terms with each other. They say that when Socrates heard Plato reading the Lysis, he said, "By Heracles, how many lies the young man is telling about me." For Plato had included in the dialogue quite a few things that Socrates did not say. Plato was also ill-disposed to Aristippus. At any rate, in his dialogue on the soul, he disparages him, saying that he was not present when Socrates died, but was in Aegina, right nearby. They say that he also vied with Aeschines, because the latter was highly esteemed by Dionysius, and that when Aeschines arrived at the court, he was spurned by Plato because of his poverty, while Aristippus supported him. And Diogenes claims that the arguments that Plato has critics make in his prison, advising Socrates to escape, were actually advanced by Aeschines, and that Plato attributed them to Crito out of spite. Plato nowhere mentions himself in his writings, except in the dialogue on the soul and in the Apology. Aristotle says that the style of dialogues is somewhere between poetry and prose. Favorinus says that Aristotle alone stayed to listen when Plato was reading on the soul, though the rest of the audience got up and left. Some say that Philip of Opus transcribed Plato's laws, which were preserved on wax tablets. They also mention that Philip was the author of Epinomis. Euphorion and Laertius have said that several revisions of the opening of the Republic had been discovered. Aristoxenus says that almost the entire Republic was included in Protagoras' disputations. It is said that the first dialogue he wrote was the Phaedrus, for the undertaking has a fresh and youthful feeling. Dicæarchus, however, disparages its whole style as vulgar. It is said that Plato, after watching someone play at dice, admonished him, and when the man said that he played for an insignificant stake, Plato replied, "But the habit is not insignificant." When asked if there would be memoirs of him, as there are of his predecessors, he replied, "One must first make one's name, and the memoirs will follow." One day, when Xenocrates had come by, Plato told him to flog his slave, since he himself was too enraged to do so. He is also reported to have said to one of his slaves, "I would have flogged you had I not been so enraged." Being seated on horseback, he quickly dismounted, saying that he had to take care not to be corrupted by horse pride. He advised those who were drunk to look at themselves in the mirror, for they would then abstain from such unseemly conduct. To drink to excess, he said, was nowhere becoming except at feasts of the god who gave us wine. He also disapproved of sleeping too much. Welcome to the stream, Daron, again, though you are here for the first time. He also disapproved of sleeping too much. In the laws, at any rate, he says that no one who is sleeping is good for anything. He said that the truth is the pleasantest thing to hear. According to others, he said it was the pleasantest thing to speak. In the laws, he says this about truth. "Truth, my friend, is beautiful and steadfast, but it is not easy to persuade men of this." He also thought it right to leave a memorial of himself behind, either in the hearts of friends or in books. He spent most of his time in seclusion, according to some writers. He died in the manner we have related in the 13th year of Philip's reign, as Favorinus says in his third book of his reminiscences. Theopompus says that Plato was accorded honours by Philip. Myronianas, in his Parallels, says that Philo mentions some proverbs about Plato's lice, implying that this was the cause of his death. He was buried in the academy, where he had passed most of his life in the study of philosophy. Hence, the school he founded was called the Academic School, and the entire population of Athens joined in the funeral procession from the academy. His will runs as follows. This property has been left, and these dispositions made by Plato. The estate in Iphrastidide, bounded on the north by the road from the temple of Caphista, on the south by the temple of Heracles of Iphrastide, on the east by the property of Archistratus of Pherae, and on the west by that of Philip of Callidae. Let no one be permitted to sell or transfer it, but let it be the property of young Adamantus, for all intents and purposes. The estate in Erycide, which I brought from Callimachus, bounded on that north by the property of Eurymedon of Naihanus, on the south by that of Demostratus of Zypete, on the east by that of Eurymedon of Merinus, and on the west by Cesiphus. 3 mines of silver, a silver bowl weighing 165 drachmas, a small cup weighing 45 drachmas, a gold signet ring, a gold earring, both together weighing 4 drachmas, and 3 obols. Euclides the mason owes me 3 manas. I grant Artemis her freedom. I leave 4 servants, Tychon, Bictes, Apollonides, and Dionysius. Household furniture, as set down in the inventory, a copy of which is in Demetrius's possession. I owe no one anything. My executors are Leosthenes, Speusippus, Demetrius, Hegaius, Eurymedon, Callimachus, and Thrasyppus. Well, there you have it. That is the will of Plato. Such was his will. The following epitaphs were inscribed on his tomb. The first, excelling among mortals, for temperance and justice, here lies divine Aristocles. If anyone ever won great praise for wisdom, he won the greatest, and without arousing envy. Next, earth hides Plato's body in her bosom, but his soul has an immortal station with the blessed, Ariston's son, whom every good man, though living far off, honours for glimpsing the divine life. And a third, eagle, why do you swoop over this tomb? Tell me, do you gaze at the starry house of one of the gods? I, an image of the soul of Plato, which has flown to Olympus, while his earth-born body lies in Attic soil. There is also my own, which runs as thus. And how could Phobos, unless he brought Plato to life in Greece, have healed the souls of men by letters? For Asclepius, the god-son, is a healer of the body, while Plato heals the immortal soul. And another on how he died. Phobos gave mortals Asclepius and Plato, the one to save the soul, the other the body. After a wedding feast, Plato departed to the city he had built for himself and resided in the abode of Zeus. These are his epitaphs. His students were Speusippus of Athens, Xenocrates of Chalcedon, Aristotle of Stagira, Philip of Opus, Hestiaeus of Perintheus, Dion of Syracuse, Amyclus of Heraclea, Erastus and Coriscus of Skepsis, Timoleus of Cyzicus, Euaeon of Lampsacus, Python and Heraclides of Aeneas, Hippothales and Calipus of Athens, Demetrius of Amphipolis, Heraclides of Ponticus, and many more, including 2 women, Lasphenia of Mantinea and Astyphia of Philus, who is reported by Dicaearchus to have worn men's clothes. Some say that Theophrastus also attended Plato's lectures. Camillian includes Hyperides the orator and Lycurgus, as does Polemon. Sabinus adds Demosthenes, citing Ministratus of Phason as his authority in the 4th book of his collected meditations, and this is likely. Now for you, who are rightly fond of Plato, and eager to examine his philosophical doctrines in preference to those of anyone else, I have considered it necessary to sketch the nature of his discourses. Side note here, that was a very, very rare grammatical form there. There was a direct address to the reader. You very rarely see that in books, especially ancient books. Quite rare to see a direct address. I have considered it necessary to sketch the nature of his discourses, the classification of his dialogues, and the method of his arguments by induction, in an elementary way as possible and in summary form, in order that the information I have gathered about his life may not be found to omit his doctrines, for it would be like carrying owls to Athens, as the saying goes, were I to provide you with a highly detailed account. I'll drink some water. It is said that Zeno of Elea was the first to write dialogues, but Aristotle, in the first book of his work on Polis, declares that Alexamenus of Styra, or of Teos, as Favorinus says in his Reminiscences, was the first. It seems to me, however, that Plato, who perfected the form, ought in fairness to be awarded the prize for its discovery, as well for its elaboration. A dialogue is a conversation consisting of questions and answers on some philosophical or political topic, with careful attention to the characters of the persons introduced and their way of speaking. Dialectic is the art of discourse by which we either refute or establish some proposition by means of the interlocutor's questions and answers. Of the Platonic dialogues, there are two principal types, one adapted for instruction and the other for inquiry. The instructional type is itself divided into two types, the theoretical and the practical. The theoretical is divided into the physical and the logical, and the practical into the ethical and the political. The type concerned with inquiry is also divided into two types, one fostering dialectical skill and the other skill in debate. The type concerned with skill in dialectic has two subdivisions, one maetic, meaning midwifery, the other periastic, meaning trial or attempt. And the type concerned with skill in debate can also be divided into two types, the probative and the refutative, or the refutative. We are not unaware that some writers classify the dialogues differently, for they say that some are dramatic, others narrative, and still others a combination of the two. But they classify the dialogues in a manner more appropriate for tragedy than philosophy. Physics is covered in the Timaeus, logic in Statesman, Critias, Parmenides, and the Sophist, ethics in the Apology, Crito, Phaedro, and Phaedrus, and the Symposium, as well as the Menexenus, Cleitophon and Letters and Philebus and Hipparchus, and the Rivals in Love, and politics in the Republic, Laws, Minos, Epaminondas, and Atlantis. Side note, Atlantis is an alternative title for the Critias. The Maetic category includes Alcibiades, Theages, Lysis, and Laches, and the Periastic category Euthyphro, Meno, Charmides, Ion, and Theaetetus, the probative Protagoras, and the refutative Euthydemus, Gorgias, and the two dialogues entitled Hippias. So much for the subjects of dialogue, its definition, and its varieties. Since there is a considerable disagreement between those who claim that Plato lays down positive views and those who disagree, let me make a determination concerning this question. A dogmatist lays down dogmas, just as a legislator lays down laws, and dogma has two meanings, namely the thing that is opined and the opinion itself. The former of these is a proposition, the latter a conception. Now, where he comprehends the subject's matter, Plato declares his own view, and refutes the false one. But when discussing about what is unclear, he holds back. He presents his own views through 4 characters: Socrates, Timaeus, the Athenian stranger, and the Elean stranger. The strangers are not, as some assume, Plato and Parmenides, but anonymous fictional characters. And even when Socrates and Timaeus are speaking, it is Plato's views that are being laid down. And to indicate which views are false, he introduces characters who are refuted, such as Thrasymachus, Callicles, Polus, Gorgias, and Protagoras, as well as Hippias, Euthydemus, and the like. In constructing his proofs, he primarily uses induction, not always in the same way, but in 2 forms, for induction is an argument that, by means of certain true propositions, properly infers the truth of a proposition that resembles him. I believe they're talking about either a syllogism or straight up induction. No, never mind, ignore what I said there. There are 2 methods of induction. One proceeds by contradiction, the other by agreement. In the kind that proceeds by contradiction, the answer offered to every question will be the opposite of the interlocutor's position. As for example, my father is either other than or the same as your father. So, if your father is other than my father, then, being other, he would not be my father. But if he is the same as my father, then, being the same, he would be my father. And again, if man is not an animal, he would either be a stone or a stick. But he is not a stone or a stick, for he is animate and self-moving. Hence, he is an animal. But if he is an animal, and if a dog or an ox is also an animal, then man, being an animal, would also be a dog or an ox. This is an instance of induction by contradiction and opposition, which Plato used not for laying down positive views, but for refutation. Induction by agreement has 2 forms. One proves a particular proposition under investigation from a particular. The other proves the universal from a particular. The former is employed in rhetoric, the latter in dialectic. For example, under the first form, one seeks to know whether so-and-so has committed a murder. The proof is that, at the time of the murder, the man was found to be covered in blood. This is the rhetorical form of induction, since rhetoric is concerned with particulars and not universals. For it does not investigate justice in the abstract, but particular instances of justice. The other form, where the universal is first established by reference to particulars, is dialectical. For example, the question is asked whether the soul is immortal, and whether the living come back from the dead. This is proved in the dialogue On the Soul. By means of a certain general proposition, namely that opposites come from opposites, but the universal proposition itself is established from particular instances. For example, that sleep comes from waking and vice versa, and the greater from the smaller, and vice versa. This is the form of induction that Plato used to establish his own views. I'm going to drink some water. Just as, long ago, in tragedy, the chorus was at first the only actor, and later Thespis devised a single actor in order to let the chorus catch its breath, and Aeschylus a second, and Sophocles a third, and thus tragedy was perfected. So too with philosophy, For at first its discourse concerned one subject only, namely physics. Then Socrates added ethics, and Plato dialectics, and so brought philosophy to its perfection. Priscillus says that Plato, like the tragic poets, published his dialogues in tetralogies. The tragic poets competed with 4 dramas at the Dionysia, the Lena, the Panathenea, and the festival of the Kytri. Of the 4 plays, the last was a satire, and the 4 dramas were called a tetralogy. Accordingly, says Priscillus, there are 56 genuine dialogues, provided that the Republic is divided into 10. Though Favorinus, in the second book of his miscellaneous history, says that almost the entire Republic was found in Protagoras' disputations, and the laws into 12. This makes 9 tetralogies, if the Republic counts as a single book, and the laws as another. He gives the dialogue of the first tetralogy a common subject, for he wishes to describe what the life of the philosopher should be. He gives each book a 2-part title, the first part taken from the name of the interlocutor, the second from the subject. The first tetralogy begins with Euthyphro, or On Piety, a periastic dialogue. The second is the Apology of Socrates, an ethical dialogue. The third is Crito, or On What Is to Be Done, ethical. The fourth is Phaedo, or On the Soul, ethical. The second tetralogy begins with Cratylus, or On the Correctness of Names, a logical dialogue, which is followed by Theaetetus, or On Knowledge, a periastic dialogue. The Sophist, or On Being, a logical dialogue, and The Statesman, or On Monarchy, also logical. The third begins with Parmenides, or On Ideas, logical, which is followed by Philebus, or On Pleasure, ethical. The Symposium, or On the Good, ethical. And Phaedrus, or On Love, ethical. The fourth begins with Alcibiades, or On the Nature of Men, a Maetic dialogue, which is followed by Second Alcibiades, or On Prayer, also Maetic. Hipparchus, or The Lover of Gain, ethical. And Rivals in Love, or On Philosophy, ethical. The fifth begins with Theages, or On Philosophy, Maetic, which is followed by Charmides, or On Temperance, a periastic dialogue. Laches, or On Courage, Maetic, and Lysis, or On Friendship, Maetic. The sixth begins with Euthydemus, or the Eristic, refutative, which is followed by Protagoras, or the Sophists, probative. Gorgias, or On Rhetoric, refutative, I can never say that word. And Meno, or On Virtue, a periastic dialogue. The seventh begins with 2 dialogues entitled Hippias, the first On Beauty, the second On Falsehood, both refutative, which are followed by Ion, or On the Iliad, periastic, and Menexenus, or the Funeral Oration, ethical. The eighth begins with Cleitophon, or Oratory, ethical, which is followed by the Republic, or On Justice, political. Timaeus, or On Nature, physical, and Critias, or The Story of Atlantis, ethical. The ninth begins with Minos, or On Law, political, which is followed by The Laws, or On Legislation, political. Epinomis, or Night Meeting, or Philosopher, political. Finally, the 13 letters, which are all ethical, in which he uses the salutation farewell, as Epicurus used live well, and Cleon, be of good cheer. There is one letter to Aristodemus, 2 to Archytas, 4 to Dionysius, 1 to Hermias, Erastus, and Corisicus, 1 each to Leodamus, Dion, Perdiccas, and 2 to Dion's friends. This is how Phasaelus and some others classify Plato's work. Interesting side note here. I believe this is the exact order that my Plato book is ordered in. So it seems that my book is ordered in the order of someone 2,000 years ago. Very fascinating. I'll drink some water after that long bit there. Some, however, including Aristophanes the grammarian, grouped the dialogues in trilogies. In the first place, they placed the Republic Timaeus and Critias. In the second, Sophist, Statesman, and Cratylus. In the third, Laws, Minos, and Epinomis. In the fourth, Theaetetus, Euryphro, and Apology. In the fifth, Crito, Phaedro, and Letters. The rest are single works, in no particular order. Some writers, as has been mentioned, put the Republic first. Others start with Greater Alcibiades. Others with Theages. Some with Euphyphro. Others with Cleitophon. Some with Timaeus. Some with Phaedrus. Others with Theaetetus. Many put the Apology first. By common consent, the following dialogues are considered spurious: Medon, Horsebreeder, Euryxias, Aristides, Alcyon, Alcaphale, Sisyphus, Axiochus, Phaeacians, Demodocus, Caladion, Seventh Day, Epimenides. These are all dialogues I've never heard of. I assume they were long discarded, considering their spurious nature. Of these, the Alcyon is thought to be the work of a certain Leon, as Favorinus says in his 5th book of his Reminiscences. He has used a variety of terms in order to make his system less intelligible to the ignorant. He considers wisdom, in its most specific sense, to be the knowledge of those things that are intelligible, and that truly exist. The science, which he declares, is concerned with God and the soul, when separated from the body. In a particular case, in a particular sense, he also calls wisdom philosophy, which is a longing for divine wisdom. In a general sense, wisdom is used by him to refer to any form of skill, as when he calls an artisan wise, and he uses the same words in a number of different senses. At any rate, he uses the word phaulos, in the sense of haplos. Let's see what the side notes say. The Greek word phaulos means poor or common. It generally has a pejorative sense, but can be used to denote simplicity in a positive sense. Haplos simply means simple. As does Euripides in his Lysimnius, when referring to Heracles in the following passage. Simple, rude, perfectly honest, reserving all wisdom for action, unskilled in speech. Sometimes Plato uses the same word to mean bad, and at other times small. He often uses different words to express the same thing. He calls the idea form, species, model, principle, and cause. He also uses contrary expressions for the same thing. At any rate, he calls the sensible object that which is and is not, and that which is, because it comes into being, and that which is not, because it is constantly changing. And he says that the idea is neither in motion nor at rest, that the self-same thing is both one and many, and it is his habit to do this in many instances. The interpretation of his dialogues includes 3 things. First, one must explain the meaning of what is being said in each case. Then one must determine its purpose. whether it is making an indispensable point or merely serving as an illustration, and whether it is establishing doctrines or refuting the interlocutor. And third, one must consider whether what has been said is correct, since various critical marks are found in his works. Let us say something about them here. A chi, the Greek letter chi, it looks like an X, is understood to indicate expressions and figures of speech, and in general, an idiom of Platonic usage. The dipole, where they've got a picture of a right-facing arrow, indicates Plato's doctrines and opinions. The dotted chi, literally a dotted chi, draws attention to quotations and elegancies of style. The dotted dipole, again it's a dipole that is dotted, indicates the correctness of certain editors. The dotted obalus, a divide sign, passages suspected for no good reason, and the dotted reverse sigma looks like a half moon with a dot in the middle. I'm not sure what these symbols are. I've never seen these symbols before, but we're going on. Repetitions and possible transpositions. The serranium, the letter T. Passages requiring a philosophical clarification. The asterisk, an asterisk. An agreement of doctrine. The obelus, subtraction sign. A spurious passage. So much for the critical marks in his works. As Antigonus and Charistius says in his work on Zeno, when the edited works were first published, anyone who wished to read them had to pay a fee to their owners. Hello, Guy Liner. Welcome to the stream. These were his approved doctrines. He held that the soul is immortal, that it clothes itself in a succession of different bodies, and that it has a numerical first principle, whereas the body's first principle is geometrical. He defined soul as a form of breath diffused in all directions, and held that it is self-moving and tripartite. Its rational part is seated in the region of the head, the spirited part in the region of the heart, while the appetitive part is constructed in the region of the navel and the liver. The soul encloses the body on all sides, from the centre outwards, in a circle, and is composed of elements, divided at harmonic intervals. It forms two circles that meet each other at 2 points, and the inner circle, being slit 6 times, makes 7 circles in all. The inner circle moves on a diagonal to the left, and the outer to the right, and because it is single, the outer circle dominates, for the inner circle has been divided. The outer circle of the same, the inner ones of those of the other. By which he means that the motion of the soul is that of the universe, together with the revolutions of the planets. Divided in this way, and harmonized from the centre to the extremities, the soul recognizes the realities and harmonizes them because of its own elements, are harmoniously proportioned. When the circle of the other revolves correctly, the result is opinion, whereas when the circle of the same does so, the result is knowledge. Plato posits 2 universal principles, God and matter, and he calls God mind and cause, and he held that matter is formless and unlimited, and that composite things arise out of it. He says that, though it once moved in a disorderly manner, it was brought together in one place by God, since he preferred order to disorder. This substance was converted into the 4 elements, fire, water, air, and earth, and from these the universe itself and all it contains are generated. He says that the earth is the only unchangeable element, and holds that it is due to the peculiarity of its constituent shapes, for he says that the shapes that constitute the others are of the same kind. All are made of identical scalene triangles, whereas the shape that constitutes Earth is peculiar. The element of fire is a pyramid, of air an octahedron, of water an icosahedron, of earth a cube. Hence Earth is not converted into any of them, nor are they converted into Earth. The elements are not separated, each into its own region, because the motion of the universe, which exerts pressure on them and draws them towards the centre, aggregates the small particles and separates the large. Hence, as they change their shape, the elements also change their positions. There exists one universe, created, since it is perceptible, which has been made by God. It is animate, because what is animate is better than what is inanimate. And this piece of workmanship is assumed to have come from the best of causes. It was made one, and not unlimited, because the model from which God made it was one. It is spherical, because such is the shape of its creator, for that creator encompasses the living things, and this universe, the shapes of them all. It is smooth, and has no surrounding organ, because it has no need of organs. Furthermore, the universe remains indestructible, because it is not dissolved into the deity. The creation as a whole is caused by God, because the good is by nature beneficent, and the creation of the universe has the good as its cause. For the most beautiful of created things, has the best of intelligible causes. Accordingly, since God is of this nature, and the universe, being supremely beautiful, resembles the best, it would resemble God rather than any of the created things. The universe is composed of fire, water, air, and earth. Of fire, that it may be visible, of earth, that it may be solid, of water and air, that it may be proportional. For the solids are found to be proportionate with the aid of two means, so that the whole may constitute a unity, and the universe was made up of all the elements, so that it would be a complete and indestructible. Time is an image of eternity, and while eternity remains always at rest, time is a function of the motion of the universe, for night, day, month, and all such intervals are parts of time. Hence time does not exist apart from the nature of the universe, but as soon as the universe exists, so does time. In order that time might exist, the sun, moon, and planets were created, and in order that the number of seasons might be definite, and living things might possess number, God kindled the light of the sun. The moon is in the circle directly above Earth, the sun in the next above that, and the planets in the circles beyond that. The universe is wholly animate because it is bound in inanimate motion, and in order that the universe, which had been created in the likeness of the intelligible being, might be complete, the nature of all the other animals was created. Since this pattern contains them, the universe must also contain them, and thus it has gods, which are primarily fiery in nature, and three other kinds of creatures, the winged, the aquatic, and the terrestrial. Earth is the oldest of the gods in heaven, and it was created to make night and day, and being central, it revolves around the centre. Now given, there are two causes. It must be affirmed, according to Plato, that some things are due to reason, while others have a necessary cause, the latter being air, fire, earth, and water, which, though not elements in the strictest sense of the term, are their receptacles. They are composed of triangles, and resolve into triangles. The scalene and the isosceles triangle are their constituent elements. Yeah, I think he's gone off the edge of the cliff here with this bit. He had some good ideas about politics. I don't know about his astronomy. Thus, the principles and causes of the things which there are is a model are the two mentioned above, God and matter. Matter is necessarily formless, as is also the case for the other entities they receive form. Of these, there is necessarily a cause. Receiving the ideas in one way or another, matter generates substances, and it moves because its power is variable, because it is in motion. It causes those things that are generated from it to move in turn. At first, these entities move in an irrational and irregular manner, but when they begin to constitute the universe, insofar it was possible that they were made symmetrical and orderly by God, for the two causes existed before the creation of the world, and becoming came third. They were not distinct, however, but only existed in the form of traces, and were in no sort of order. When the world came into being, they too acquired order, and from all existing bodies, the universe was created. Plato holds that God, like the soul, is incorporeal, for this renders him immune to decay and death. Plato assumes, as has been mentioned, that the ideas are causes and principles, whereby the world of natural objects is what it is. I'll drink some water after that. We're now going to go on to a bit about ethics. What do you mean comprehensive? Matter and that? I don't know. It's a short book, so while I don't agree with the stuff about the structure of the universe, I think that's a load of bunk. It's interesting to read, and I'm glad that Diogenes Laertius has written it and not discarded it. About good and evil, he had this to say. He maintained that the goal of human life is assimilation to God, and that virtue is sufficient for happiness. But it also requires instruments that confer bodily advantages, such as strength, health, a keen sensibility, and so forth. It also needs external advantages such as wealth, good birth, and reputation. Yet the wise man will be no less happy if these are not present. Moreover, he will engage in public life, marry, and refrain from breaking existing laws. To the extent circumstances permit, he will legislate for his own country, unless he sees that the political situation is utterly irremediable owing to excessive partisanship. He believes that gods oversee human affairs, and that semi-divine beings exist. He was the first to define the notion of good as that which is linked to whatever is praiseworthy, rational, useful, becoming, and appropriate, all of which are linked to that which is consistent and in harmony with nature. He also discoursed on the correctness of names, and was thus the first to develop a science for correctly asking and answering questions, a science of which he made excessive use. In the dialogues, he conceived justice to be the law of God, because it is a more effective incitement to do right, lest we be punished, even after death, as evildoers. For this he has been felt by some to be overly devoted to myths. Interesting. It is interesting there that this man who would have lived during a time of pagan rule would have acknowledged the myths as myths. I didn't know that. That's interesting. He intersperses these tales throughout his works in order to deter men from wicked deeds by reminding them that they are ignorant of what awaits them after death. These, then, are the doctrines he approved. Plato divided things, according to Aristotle, in the following manner. Among good things, some are in the mind and some are in the body, and some are external. For example, justice, wisdom, courage, temperaments, and so forth are in the mind. Beauty, a good constitution, health, and strength are in the body, while friends, a good reputation, the prosperity of one's country, and wealth are external. Thus, there are three kinds of good: goods of the mind, goods of the body, and external goods. There are three kinds of friendship. One is natural, another social, and another hospitable. By natural friendship, we mean that which parents have for their offspring, and kinsmen for one another. The other, we have also inherited this form. By social friendship, we mean that which arises from intimacy, and has nothing to do with kinship. For example, that of Pylades, or Orestes. The friendship between host and guest comes about between strangers, as a result of the introduction or letters of recommendation. Thus, friendship is natural, social, or hospitable. Some add a fourth kind, namely erotic. There are 5 forms of government. One is democratic, another is aristocratic, a third oligarchic, a fourth monarchic, and a fifth tyrannical. The democratic form is that in which the people wield power and choose their magistrates and laws. The aristocratic form is that in which power is exercised not by the rich or the poor or the illustrious, but by the best citizens. An oligarchy exists whenever offices are held by those who meet property qualifications, for the wealthy are fewer than the poor. Welcome to the stream, Cliffoff. I hope you did well. I think I saw you in the stream. I didn't see what you was up to though. But welcome nonetheless. We are reading Diogenes Laertius' book, where he is talking about the life and philosophy of Plato, as written in the 3rd century, almost 2,000 years ago. Escape the back rooms. I think the back rooms are really comfy, to be honest. They're like a dream you forgot you remembered. If I could go anywhere, if there was life after death, I would like to go to the back rooms and remain there for eternity. That would be a most agreeable death, I think. And if there is no monster there, then I will be happy alone, since I'm quite alright alone. But if there is a monster there, then I will be pleased to have company. Let's see, where else are we? Let's see. The aristocratic, the oligarchic. Monarchy is regulated either by law or by hereditary. In Carthage, it is regulated by law, for there the sovereignty is for sale. In Lacedaemon and Macedonia, it is hereditary, for there they select the king from a certain family. Tyrannical government is that in which the people, subjugated by either fraud or force, are governed by an individual. Thus the government is either democratic, aristocratic, oligarchic, monarchic, or tyrannical. There are 3 kinds of justice. One is concerned with gods, another with men, another with the departed. For those who sacrifice according to the laws take care of the temples, clearly revere the gods, and those who repay loans and return deposits act honestly toward men, and those who take care of tombs clearly show respect for the departed. Thus there is justice toward men and gods, and toward the departed. There are 3 kinds of knowledge: practical, productive, and theoretical. Architecture and shipbuilding are productive, for the work produced by them can be seen. Politics, flute playing, harp playing, and so forth are practical, for they produce nothing visible, but they perform something. In one case, a man plays the flute. In another, harp playing, and so forth. Oh, hang on, I went up a bit there. In another, the harp, and another, he engages in politics. Geometry and harmonics and astronomy are theoretical, for they neither perform nor produce anything. Take care, Cliffoff. I will also have to go shopping after this. For they neither perform nor produce anything, but the geometer examines how lines relate to one another. The student of harmonics investigates sounds, and the astronomer studies the stars and the universe. Thus, some knowledge is theoretical, some practical, and some productive. There are 5 kinds of medicine: pharmacological, surgical, dietetic, diagnostic, and palliative. Those are some difficult words, I probably pronounced those terribly. Pharmacological medicine cures sickness by administering drugs. Surgical medicine heals by cutting and cautery. Dietetic medicine alleviates illness by altering the diet. Diagnostic medicine determines the nature of the sickness, and palliative medicine provides immediate relief from pain. Thus, the branches of medicine are pharmacological, surgical, dietetic, diagnostic, and palliative. There are 2 kinds of laws, the written and the unwritten. The laws that govern how we live in cities are written. That which arises by custom is unwritten. For example, the prohibition against walking naked in the marketplace or wearing women's clothes. There is no specific law forbidding this. I thought they were gonna say, oh, those are the written laws, but no, those are the unwritten laws. Oh dear. I need to read that again, that was funny. Where was I? Oh, I've lost my page. For example, the prohibition against walking naked in the marketplace, or wearing women's clothes. There is no specific law forbidding this, but we are prohibited from such conduct by an unwritten law. Thus, law is either written or unwritten. There are 5 kinds of speech. One is the kind politicians use, as in the assembly. This is called political speech. Another kind is that which the orators use in their written compositions, whether for praise, censure, accusation, or defense. This is called rhetorical speech. The third kind is that which private citizens use for conversing with one another. This is called private speech. Another kind is that which is used by those who engage in an exchange of short questions and answers. This is called dialectical speech. The fifth kind is that which craftsmen use for discussing their own subjects. This is called technical speech. Thus, speech is political, rhetorical, private, dialectical, or technical. There are 3 kinds of music. One employs only the mouth, like singing. The second employs both the mouth and the hands, as when harp player sings to his own accompaniment. And the third employs only the hands, as in harp playing. Thus, music may employ either the mouth alone, or both the mouth and the hands, or only the hands. There are 4 kinds of nobility. First, if the ancestors are handsome, gentle, and righteous, their descendants are said to be noble. Secondly, if the ancestors have been princes or magistrates, their descendants are said to be noble. Thirdly, if the ancestors are renowned, either for military leadership or athletic success, we call their descendants noble. Fourthly, if a man proves to be generous and magnanimous, he too is said to be noble. And this is the highest form of nobility. Thus, nobility depends on ancestors who are excellent, powerful, or renowned, or on one's personal integrity. There are 3 kinds of beauty. The first is the kind that elicits praise. For example, a form that pleases the eye. Another is the kind that provides something useful. Thus, an instrument, a house, and the like are beautiful because of their utility. Lastly, laws and practices and so forth are beautiful because they are beneficial. Thus, one kind of beauty is concerned with praise, another with utility, and another with procuring benefits. The soul is divided into 3 parts. One part of it is rational, another appetitive, and a third aggressive. The rational part is the cause of deliberation, reasoning, understanding, and so forth. The appetitive part is the cause of the desire to eat, to have sexual relations, and so forth. The aggressive part is the cause of boldness, pleasure, pain, and anger. Thus, one part of the soul is rational, and another appetitive, and a third aggressive. There are 4 kinds of perfect virtue: wisdom, justice, courage, temperaments. Of these, wisdom is the cause of correct conduct, justice of honest dealings in partnerships and transactions. Courage enables a man not to abandon his post, but to stand firm in dangers and emergencies. Temperaments imparts mastery over desires, so that we are not enslaved by any pleasure, but lead an orderly life. Virtue thus includes wisdom, courage, justice, and temperaments. Rule has 5 divisions. One is rule according to law, another according to nature, a third according to custom, a fourth by hereditary, and a fifth by force. When those who govern cities are elected by citizens, they rule by law. Those who rule by nature are the males, not only among human beings, but in the animal world as well, for everywhere the males generally dominate the females. Rule by custom is that which caretakers exercise over children, and teachers over their students. Rule by hereditary is that which is said to prevail among the Lacedaemonians, for the office there belongs to a certain family. There is also the case in Macedonia, for there too the office is hereditary. Others who have obtained power by force or fraud govern the citizens against their will. This is called rule by force. Thus rule is either by law, by nature, by custom, by hereditary, or by force. There are 6 kinds of rhetoric. When orators exhort the people to make war, or to form an alliance with someone, that kind of rhetoric is called persuasion. When they demand that the people not fight or form an alliance, but remain at peace, it is called dissuasion. A third kind is used when a speaker declares that he has been injured by someone whom he claims has done him great harm. This is called an accusation. A fourth kind is used when a speaker declares that he has done nothing wrong and that his conduct is not at all objectionable. This kind is called a defense. A fifth kind is used when a speaker speaks well of another and declares him to be noble and honourable. This is called an encomium. A sixth kind is used when a speaker declares someone to be unworthy. This is called a censure. Thus, the forms of rhetoric include encomium, censure, persuasion, dissuasion, accusation, and defense. Effective speaking has 4 aspects: what one should say, at what length one should speak, to whom one should speak, and at what moment one should speak. As for what one should say, it is that which will be expedient for the speaker and the hearer. The length at which one should speak is that which is neither more nor less than sufficient. To whom one should speak, if one is addressing older persons, one's discourse must be tailored to older listeners. If addressing the young, it must be tailored to the young. As for the moment at which one should speak, it should be neither too early nor too late, otherwise the speaker will miss the mark and his speech will not succeed. There are 4 ways. Let me drink some water here. Oh, am I running out? No, almost. There are 4 ways of conferring benefits. One may benefit another with money, physical assistance, knowledge, or speech. Financial assistance to one who is in need eases his plight. Personal assistance is given whenever one comes to the aid of those who are being beaten. Those who educate, practice medicine, or offer instruction in something valuable confer the benefits by means of knowledge. Whenever a man appears in court to defend another and speaks effectively on his behalf, he is conferring a benefit by means of speech. Thus one can benefit another with money, physical health, knowledge, or speech. There are 4 ways in which things are accomplished and completed. Things may be accomplished by legal action, as occurs when a decree is passed and is confirmed by law. Things may be completed in accordance with nature, as the day, the year, and the seasons are completed. Things may be completed by art, for example, by the builder's art, by which a house is completed, or by the shipbuilder's art, by which vessels are completed. Things may be accomplished by chance, when matters turn out otherwise than one expects. And thus, things may be accomplished and completed in 4 ways: by law, by nature, by art, and by chance. There are 4 kinds of ability. First, whatever we are able to do with the mind, namely to reason and understand. Second, whatever we are able to do by means of the body, for example, to march, to give, to take, and so forth. Thirdly, whatever we are able to do by a multitude of soldiers or a great deal of money. Hence, a king is said to have great ability. Fourthly, there is the ability to do and suffer good and evil. For example, we are able to fall ill, and to be educated, and to regain health, and so forth. Thus, ability may be in the mind, the body, in armies and resources, or in acting and suffering. There are 3 kinds of benevolence. One is by way of greeting, as when certain people address everyone they meet and extend a welcoming hand. Another is seen when someone comes to the aid of every person in distress. Another is that which makes certain people fond of hosting dinners. Thus, benevolence is expressed by greeting, by conferring benefits, or by hosting dinners and entertainment. Happiness has 5 aspects. One aspect of it is sound judgment, a second, keen sensibility and physical health, a third, success in one's undertaking, a fourth, a good reputation among men, fifth, an abundance of money and worldly goods. Sound judgment is the result of education and broad experience. Keen sensibility depends on our physical organs. That is, if someone sees with his eyes and hears with his ears, and if his nose and mouth are correctly register the appropriate objects, such is keen sensibility. Success is achieved whenever a man attains his ends in the right way, as befits a good man. A man has achieved a good reputation when he is well spoken of. A man is prosperous when he is so amply supplied with the necessities of life that he can afford to benefit his friends and discharge his public obligations handsomely. A man who possesses all these things is perfectly happy. Thus, the aspects of happiness are sound judgment, keen sensibility, physical health, good fortune, a good reputation, and prosperity. Of the arts, there are 3 kinds. The first include mining and forestry, for these provide materials. The second includes metalworking and carpentry, which transform the materials. For the smith makes weapons out of iron, while the carpenter uses timber to make flutes and lyres. The third division puts what is made to use. Horsemanship, for example, uses bridles, warfare uses weapons, and music uses flutes and the lyre. Thus, of art, there are 3 kinds, the first, the second, and the third. New phone, who dis? Hello, welcome. I'm guessing you fell in here from a raid. Good is divided into 4 kinds. One is the possessor of virtue, whom we declare is individually good. Another is virtue itself, and justice, which we declare are good. A third includes such things as food, suitable exercise, and medicines. The fourth kind we declare as good includes such things as the art of flute playing, acting, and poetic art. Thus there are 4 kinds of good. First, the possession of virtue. Second, the virtue itself. Third, food and beneficial exercise. And fourth, flute playing, acting, and the art of poetry. Whatever exists is bad, good, or indifferent. We call bad that which can always do harm. For example, poor judgments, folly, injustice, and so forth. The opposite of these are good. As for things that sometimes benefit, but sometimes harm, for example, walking and sitting and eating, of which are wholly unable to benefit or harm. These things are neither good nor bad, thus all things that exist are either good, bad, or neither. There are 3 kinds of good civic order. First, we call the good civic order good if the laws are good. Secondly, we also call it good if the citizens abide by the existing laws. Thirdly, if in the absence of laws, the citizens live well in accordance with their customs and practices, we also call this good order. Thus, there is good civic order if the laws are good, secondly, if the citizens are law-abiding, and thirdly, if the citizens live in accordance with good customs and practices. My character is Roman. You can tell by the red stripes on my tunic. It is a thing the Romans did, not the Greeks. There are 3 kinds of lawlessness. The first arises if the laws that affect both strangers and citizens are bad. The second, if the citizens do not obey the existing laws. The third, if there is no law at all. Thus, lawlessness exists if the laws are bad, secondly, if the laws are not obeyed, and thirdly, if there is no law. There are 3 kinds of contraries. For example, we see that goods are contrary to evil, as justice is contrary to injustice, wisdom to folly, and so forth. Furthermore, evils are contrary to evils. For example, prodigality is contrary to stinginess, and to be tortured unjustly is the contrary to being tortured justly, and so forth. Finally, heavy is contrary to light, swift to slow, black to white. Pairs of contrary in which neither element is good or evil. Among the contraries, then, there are some that oppose goods to evils, and others that oppose evils to evils, and still others that oppose things neither good nor evil, to things neither good nor evil. There are 3 kinds of goods: those that can be possessed, those that can be partaken of, and those that simply exist. The goods that can be possessed include such things as justice, health. The goods that can be partaken of include all things that cannot be possessed, but those that can be partaken of. For example, the absolute good cannot be possessed, but one can partake of it. The third kind include goods that simply exist, though we can neither partake of them nor possess them. For example, the mere existence of excellence and justice is good. And these things can be neither possessed nor partaken of, but must simply exist. And those that simply exist. There are 3 kinds of advice. One is taken from the past, one from the future, and one from the present. Advice taken from the past consists of examples. For instance, what the Lacedaemonians suffered by trusting others. Advice taken from the present is meant to show, for example, that walls are weak, men cowardly, and food scanty. Advice from the future, for example, not to undermine embassies by suspicions, lest Greece lose her good name. Thus advice is taken either from the past, the present, or the future. I believe in a deterministic universe. I think that that everything that has happened will happen and will happen has already been determined and cannot be altered. In that sense, a sense of fate must exist, but I don't think we have any means of predicting it because it is far too complicated. I think if someone were to invent a computer that could calculate all the exact motions of the universe, then they would be able to predict what happens in the future. But then that brings in the question of, let's say you could see what the future was going to be in a deterministic universe. Could you then change it? Like if you said that tomorrow I'm going to go walk to the shop, and now that I know I'm going to go and walk to the shop, can I now choose not to go to the walk to the shop? Who knows? Who knows? Voice is of two kinds, animate and inanimate. The voice of living things is animate, while noises and sounds are inanimate. Exactly, it wouldn't be deterministic anymore then. There's probably some clever solution to that problem. I don't know what it is though. Of the voice of living things, part is articulate, part inarticulate. The voice of human beings is articulate, that of animals inarticulate. Thus voice is either animate or inanimate. Whatever exists is either divisible or indivisible. Among divisible things, some are homogeneous, others not. The indivisible things are those that cannot be divided, and are not composed of elements. For example, the unit, the point, the musical note. Whereas those that have constituent parts, for example syllables, musical chords, animals, water and gold, are divisible. Things that are composed of similar parts, so that the whole does not differ from the parts except in mass, like water, gold, and all that is fusible, and so forth, are called homogeneous. But things that are composed of dissimilar parts, for example a house and the like, are called heterogeneous. Thus, existent things are either divisible, indivisible, and among divisible things some are homogeneous and others are heterogeneous. Genius. Among existing things, some are absolute, and some are called relative. The things said to be absolute are those that require no explanation, like man, horse, and other animals. For none of these things gains by explanation. The things said to be relative are those that require some explanation. The things said to be, for example, that which is greater than something, or faster than something, or more beautiful, and so forth. The greater implies a lesser, the faster a slower. Among existing things, then, there are said to be the absolute, some relative. Those were Plato's primary divisions, according to Aristotle. There was another Plato, a philosopher of Rhodes, who was a pupil of Panaetus, as Seleucus the grammarian says in his first book on philosophy. Another, a Periopatic, a student of Aristotle. Another, a student of Praxiphanes, and another, a poet of the Old Comedy. And that is the end of Diogenes Laertius' account of Plato, which was good fun. I didn't expect him to go so deep into the philosophy of Plato as he did. I guess he correctly acknowledged that Plato is by far the most important of these books, whereas the others, he merely gives a brief description. There we go. That was a fun book. It was very interesting to read how virtually everything we know about Plato today, they knew about back then. They even had a good analysis of Plato. Now, of course, I'm sure there's many things that archaeologists and historians have dug up since then, and many of the philosophies have been dug in and debunked and blah blah blah, for 2,000 years. But frankly, not much has changed in 2,000 years. It shows how arrogant our modern world tends to be. How we imagine people in the past as knowing so little, and yet it is evidently not the case. Well, at least not to not to the Romans of the 3rd century. A little past the 3rd century. Maybe they did lose a bit of information, but don't worry about that. But that was that. That was that. And thank you for watching. Let's see. Is anyone I follow online? Dooby-doo. Nobody with less than 1,000 viewers. So we won't bother with a raid. We'll call it an end there. And thank you for watching. This was a good one. This was worth reading. Well worth reading.